Good morning, I'm Laura Toledo.
And I'm Zach Kotz.
Welcome back to the Global Current. First up, we'll hear from social media producer Candace Carlisle on the effects of sanctions on Iran.
Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad has declared that Iran needs to move away from its dependence on oil and gas revenue in order to overcome the adverse effects of Western sanctions. The sanctions, which have had crippling effects on the Iranian economy, have targeted Iran's oil exports and locked the country out of the international banking system. In the last year, Iran's currency has lost almost 70% of its value against the U.S. dollar, and inflation has raised the prices of just about everything, from bread to books. Crude oil sales account for 80% of Iran's foreign currency income, but the instituted sanctions put into place by the U.S. and the U.K., along with other global allies, have caused a 45% drop in oil sales, marking the lowest Iranian totals in 2 decades. The country's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has described the dependency on oil as a trap, dating from before Iran's Islamic Revolution in 1979, and from which the country should free itself. He insisted that the sanctions will not succeed. White House spokesman Jay Carney said the move shows that the comprehensive international multinational effort to sanction Iran has been effective in the sense that it has had a profound impact on the Iranian economy. The U.S. and its allies have long charged Iran with having the intention of developing nuclear weapons. Tehran denies these charges, stating its nuclear program is peaceful. They say their aim is to generate electricity and develop radioisotopes to treat cancer. A new round of sanctions on Iran will begin in 2 weeks. According to this round of sanctions, Iran would be unable to transfer exported oil money through any currency into the country. Revenues gained from oil would be transferred into an internal bank in an Iranian oil importer's country, and Iran could spend this money to import certain commodities from only those countries. The government is preparing an austerity budget for the next Iranian calendar year that begins March 21st. It aims to avoid a budget deficit by substantially increasing income taxes to make up for the shrinking oil revenues. This is Candace Carlisle with the Global Current.
Next, we'll hear technical producer Heidi Erbsen discuss Russian involvement in the Syrian crisis.
The Russian Federation has been at the forefront of international news headlines for the past few months. Whether it be the country's controversial support of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad last summer, its perceived attempts to liberalize trade by hosting the APEC summit in October, or its ban on U.S. adoptions in retaliation to the U.S. passage of the Magnitsky Act last month. In the battle of words and subtle retaliatory measures that is international relations, Russia has become a strong player, and the international community is taking notice. This alertness of the world to Russian policies means that the Russian Federation can no longer say one thing and do another. On Tuesday, the Russian Federation flew approximately 80 Russian citizens living in Syria to Moscow, an action that Foreign Minister of Russia Sergei Lavrov claims was not an evacuation of any form. According to the Russian Federation, there are tens of thousands of Russian citizens living in Syria. These individuals, many of whom are women and children, became a target of the Syrian rebel group when the Russian government became one of the only governments to recognize the legitimacy of Bashar al-Assad's regime in the early days of the conflict last spring. Although Russian leaders have maintained that the legitimate regime of Assad will regain control of the country, his evacuation of individuals from the Russian consulate in Syria hints at skepticism brewing in Moscow. On Wednesday, just after the removal of Russian individuals living in Syria, Lavrov addressed the escalating violence in Syria by stating, quote, "Everything is running up against the opposition's obsession with toppling Bashar al-Assad's regime. As long as this position remains in place, nothing good can happen." With this statement, Lavrov meant to clearly convey where Russia stands on the issue of Syria. In his speech, Lavrov claimed that the opposition's obsession with ousting the Bashir regime has hindered the diplomatic peace process and prevented humanitarian efforts in the region. While Russia remains one of the Assad regime's main allies, the Federation has significantly limited direct relations since the beginning of the conflict 2 years ago. Although leaders in Moscow continue to support Assad verbally, stability in Syria is deteriorating, leaving Russia in limbo between protecting her own and aligning her actions with policies. For now, the Russian government and Foreign Minister Lavrov maintain that this is not the beginning of an evacuation from Syria. However, should violence escalate, Russia will have to find a way to coordinate political support for a disputed regime with actions that undermine that support. With its foot firmly placed in the door of many controversial international issues, Russian policymakers will have to carefully assess not only the continually escalating conflict in Syria, but how to align and carefully coordinate its policies moving forward. This has been Heidi Erbsen for The Global Current.
And now, executive producer Zach Kotz will give us an update on the French-led intervention in Mali.
The United States has officially joined the intervention in Mali, agreeing to French requests to help airlift its soldiers to operations in Mali aimed at dispatching Islamist militants who have steadily gained control over large portions of the former French colony. In an announcement earlier this week, the Pentagon confirmed that Air Force C-17 transport planes have completed 5 flights carrying a French battalion from U.S. military bases in France to Bamako, Mali's capital city. The latest reports indicate that more than 80 troops and 120 tons of equipment have been airlifted already to Mali. Pentagon officials speculated that it could take upwards of 2 weeks to complete the move of the entire 600-man French battalion along with its equipment. According to the New York Times, Pentagon officials, quote, declined to offer details beyond saying that security for the American airlift would be provided by French forces and that a very small number of American military communications personnel were on the ground to coordinate flights. Though the airlift does expand American support for the efforts of its NATO ally, officials have proven hesitant to get too involved and continue to debate whether to approve a request by France to provide refueling tankers for French warplanes. Administration officials have promised that the U.S. footprint will remain small. A decision regarding the aerial tankers is expected from the Obama administration within days. Before the United States commits to further aid, it has asked for a clearer picture of French plans for the mission, including questions of future troop deployment levels, as well as the French exit strategy for ending its leading role in the intervention. Though the UN-mandated intervention was initially conceived as an African-led, African-owned operation when announced last November, necessity has required otherwise. With the Malian army in disarray and African neighbors scrambling to deploy troops, France has taken the lead in the operation. Over the next few weeks, French troop levels are expected to reach upwards of 3,000 men, while the contribution from African nations is expected to reach 5,000 troops. Mali has been in crisis since January 2011, when separatist Tuaregs in northern Mali began an uprising after a surge of support and influx of fighters and weapons from Libya after the fall of Colonel Muammar Gaddafi. Then, in March, a military coup by junior officers upset nearly 2 decades of democratic rule and left the country in disarray, allowing insurgents to grab control over Mali's northern half. Islamist groups, some with ties to al-Qaeda, who had aided in the fight earlier, quickly dispatched the secular Tuareg militants and began taking over towns in northern Mali, imposing a strict brand of Sharia law along the way. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton described the internationally backed UN-mandated intervention in Mali as a response to a very serious ongoing threat posed by the regional affiliate of al-Qaeda and its local allies. Quote, "We are in for a struggle, but it is a necessary struggle." Clinton reaffirmed the need to prevent Mali from becoming a terrorist safe haven. This is Zach Kotz for The Global Current.
Now we'll hear from analysis editor John Hensel as he weighs in on the challenges facing Japan's newly elected leadership.
As of the December general elections, Japan has a new government in power that must face a myriad of challenges left behind by the previous government. The new administration, under the leadership of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, must tackle both foreign and domestic issues swiftly in 2013 in order for Japan to recover from its current malaise and to secure its future throughout the rest of the 21st century. The most pressing external issue the Abe government faces is the heightened tension with China over a territorial dispute between the two nations. The Senkaku Islands, or Diaoyu in Chinese, are controlled by Japan but are claimed by both China and Taiwan. These two nations view the islands as a symbolic remnant of their past occupation by Japan. Japan's former Prime Minister, Yoshihiko Noda, inflamed the dispute when he ordered the Japanese government to purchase the islands from their private Japanese owner. Currently, China is increasing its patrols and flybys of the area, raising concerns that China and Japan will come to blows to protect the islands. Both nations see the dispute as an issue of sovereignty. Over the next decade, China is expected to continue its strong economic and military growth, raising fears in Tokyo that it is getting comparatively weaker by the day, necessitating an immediate resolution of the dispute. The Abe administration must also craft a strategy to handle another regional security issue, North Korea's nuclear program. While North Korea has had a nuclear bomb in some form or another since 2006, the small nation has continually bucked the international ban on test detonations and missile launches. Each test heightens the fears in Tokyo that Pyongyang may acquire the technical ability to deliver a nuclear warhead to Japanese soil, or that South Korea may also develop the nuclear option, thereby raising the potential for nuclear exchange in Northeast Asia. However, before Tokyo can even begin to develop a long-term strategy for dealing with the problems presented by China or North Korea, it must address vital issues at home. The most crucial domestic dilemma is that over the past 2 decades, China's economy has stagnated and the nation's debt has risen to twice its GDP. Since the March 2011 earthquake and tsunami, Japan's economic recovery has been particularly in question. Following the disaster, some businesses offshored facilities to South Korea, Taiwan, or Southeast Asia, and the nation reported its first trade deficits in over 3 decades. If the Abe administration cannot take decisive action immediately to set Japan's economy back on a strong path, the nation may be forced into a permanent decline as its neighbors continue to boast economic vitality. Worsening Japan's economic plight is its energy security situation. After the crisis at the Fukushima nuclear plant, all of Japan's nuclear power plants were shut down until their safety could be verified. Due to popular sentiment, however, nearly all the plants have remained offline, raising Japan's reliance on imported oil and natural gas. If Japan continues to rely so heavily on foreign sources of energy, the nation's trade deficit is likely to continue indefinitely. One last problem area, tying together Japan's internal and external problems, both economic and security related, is Tokyo's relationship with the United States. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, a major free trade agreement championed by Washington, faces large domestic opposition by the Abe administration's main electoral constituency, raising hurdles from the get-go. Furthermore, the Futenma Marine Base operated by the United States is widely unpopular in Japan, yet no viable deal has been reached between Tokyo and Washington on its future. As long as the base continues in limbo, it will act as a political wedge between the two nations and hamper their operations as allies. It is unlikely that Tokyo and Washington can successfully coordinate security policy in Northeast Asia, while Japanese popular sentiment uses the basing issue as an opportunity to critique every aspect of the partnership, from the overall status of forces agreement to the minutiae of aircraft deployments. In order to overcome this diverse yet intertwined set of issues facing Japan, the Abe administration must carefully weigh the political rhetoric of their campaign against policy necessities. Despite the administration's right-of-center campaign, it must stay open to dialogue with China and North Korea in order to assure cooperation prevails over belligerent nationalism. In the same vein, Abe should avoid nationalist gestures of his own, such as visiting the Yasukuni Shrine, which would only inflame Japan's neighbors. Forging a new relationship with the United States will help Japan manage the security realities of Northeast Asia in the next decades, but it must be palatable to both Tokyo's domestic and foreign audiences. As a backdrop to these security issues, the new administration should seek out new and closer relationships with the growing economies of Southeast Asia and revamp its energy security policy in order for Japan to overcome its economic stupor. Japan must diversify its imports by finding new avenues of obtaining natural gas, such as from the United States, and it must restart its nuclear power plants to reduce its dependence on other fuels and improve its trade balance. Researching safer nuclear plant designs, such as thorium reactors, for instance, could overcome the public distrust of nuclear power while simultaneously bolstering a vital Japanese industry. With these strategies in mind, Japan's new administration may be able to navigate the myriad of challenges ahead of it in 2013. If it can, Japan will come out of this period a stronger nation, capable of playing a significant role in Asia in the future. But if it cannot, Japan's international position may dwindle into obscurity. This has been John Hensel with A Global Current.
Finally, we'll hear from executive producer Laura Toledo, who will analyze the new direction for the war on drugs.
It may be a new year, but the international community continues to face many of the same challenges. The long-running war on drugs that began with Nixon's declaration in 1971 has become somewhat overshadowed by unrest in the Middle East and Africa, the recovery of the Eurozone, and even climate change. Though the war on drugs has been placed in the background, it still has wide-ranging implications for global security and human rights. In Nigeria, Ghana, and Guinea-Bissau, trafficking routes have flourished for cocaine from Colombia on its way to Europe. Europe is now the world's second largest market for the drug, coming in second only to the United States. Since the U.S. ramped up interdiction efforts, the journey to Western Africa has become more lucrative and provides relatively smooth sailing for drug traffickers. Upon reaching Africa, the drug trade contributes to corruption and instability for the countries mentioned. For countries where resources are limited and law enforcement already weak, those in the drug trade can easily bribe selected officials to let shipments through. Cartels then work closely with local criminal gangs to transport and distribute these shipments to Europe. According to CNN, at least 9 of the most powerful drug cartels in Latin America have established bases in 11 West African nations. In August of 2012, authorities set a record by seizing 5 tons of cocaine in different operations. Multiple experts have linked money made through drug smuggling to the al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. While the United States' war on drugs has largely been declared a failure, the use of drugs other than marijuana has been decreasing since the late 1990s. The war on drugs has taken a predominantly militaristic route, with total current spending estimated at over $40 billion per year. This figure includes spending on police, court costs used to try traffickers, and guards and personnel spent imprisoning and punishing those convicted. Elsewhere around the world, countries have been experimenting with different methods to reduce drug use and, in effect, trafficking. Portugal began decriminalizing drug use in 2001 and started to offer free treatment and formed state-funded street work programs. Since that time, the rate of injected drug use has halved to around 0.5% of the population. This rate is below levels in Great Britain and Italy. The financial crisis and austerity measures in Portugal have led to more stressors for recovering addicts and the worry that budgets for recovery and treatment centers may be cut. But the country's liberal drug policy is still heralded as innovative and effective. Norway is debating adopting parts of it, and Argentina is interested in enacting a similar model. Closer to home in the U.S., Mexico's newly elected president, Enrique Peña Nieto, has indicated he will split away from the U.S.'s lead in the war on drugs, pledging to focus more on reducing violence and less on cartel leaders and blocking drugs from reaching the United States. Though he is not in favor of legalizing drugs, he indicated that the recent legalization of marijuana in Washington and Colorado may bring forward changes to Mexican drug policy. For now, the military in Mexico will still be a part of Mexico's law enforcement system. These forces have been accused of everything from corruption to human rights abuses, and Peña Nieto will do well to attempt to root such injustices out. Another country central to the drug trade in Latin America, Bolivia, recently scored a huge victory at the United Nations. It was readmitted to the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs, the UN's Anti-Narcotics Convention. It did so by persuading member states to recognize the rights of indigenous peoples to chew raw coca leaf, which forms the base of cocaine. Bolivians have chewed the raw coca leaf for as long as they can remember. It is used as a mild stimulant that reduces hunger and treats altitude sickness. Bolivia's president, Evo Morales, was once a coca farmer himself. Morales suspended the activities of the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency in Bolivia in 2008 and has been an outspoken proponent of decriminalization of the coca leaf ever since. Guatemalan President Otto Pérez Molina has echoed the call of decriminalization and legalization, receiving support from Peña Nieto and current Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos. In Uruguay, the center-left Broad Front Party of President José Mujica has proposed a measure to legalize marijuana. The measure would also put the government at the helm of production, distribution, and plausibly taxation. Representatives from the U.S., Costa Rica, Colombia, and Mexico met briefly this week at the World Economic Forum in Davos to discuss drug concerns. Mexico, Costa Rica, Honduras, and Belize have all called for an international debate on drug policy. The amount of funding that goes toward combating drugs will also have to be re-examined. The U.S. has provided Colombia with over $7 billion since 2000 through Plan Colombia and over $1.5 billion to Mexico to prevent drug trafficking. Since the budget of the United States continues to swell, a look at how effectively these funds are being spent is essential. With the new year and renewed administration, the U.S. should lead the way in considering new methods to reduce drug use, trade, and crime. By welcoming the input of key countries involved, President Obama could be the person to redefine the longest war America has ever faced, the war on drugs. This has been Laura Toledo for The Global Current. Now, for further background on the conflict in Mali, we bring you this interview with Dr. Abu Bakarr Bah, Associate Professor in the Department of Sociology at Northern Illinois University.
Well, I think there are three kinds of things which maybe we can say four. I guess let's see how that goes. That somehow provides, a context for understanding the coup and what follows. The first one, of course, is the long-standing, Tuareg rebellion, which was geared towards seeking independence or autonomy for the northern part of Mali, for a host of reasons, political, cultural reasons. Why the Tuaregs, have never really accepted being part of, Mali of itself. So that has been going on, and I think that provides a context in the sense that, as the military or the Malian military loses ground, it provides, reasons for discontent within the military and so forth. So that's one kind of context. But I think the more important context, is the destabilization of the Northern African region, in part, due to, the fall of the Libyan regime and the movement of combatants and, militants, weapons, and also, the wider, if you wish, vacuum in the north that have actually allowed, that is the Sahel part of Africa, which has allowed, Islamists to gain more grounds, building upon some of the economic and social problems that are there. So that's a second factor. But I think the movement of heavily armed people from Libya, aggravates, if you wish, or hinders the ability of the Malian military to deal with the situation or to contain it, and of course, that becomes a source of discontent. The third element, I think, is the nature of the economic and social conditions, and to some degree political conditions in Mali of itself. Now, Mali was a democracy, but we have to understand that mostly what we mean by democracy is governments that are elected by, through some kind of multi-party elections that we generally assume to be free and fair. But that doesn't really touch the essence of what most of the citizens are really looking for. People don't just want elections for the sake of elections. They want elections with the hope that the governments can, improve their economic and social conditions. And I think in many ways, the government that existed in Mali, like many others, didn't actually succeed much in improving things like good governance, improving economic and social conditions, and so forth. And the third, context, which may be minor, is the military of itself. I think there are a lot of reasons why coups happen, and in rare cases or in some few cases, the military can actually be, can justifiably, if you wish, take out a very bad government, and of course move quickly to restore democracy. That happened before in Mali. When the former dictator was deposed. But I think in this case, there's an element of lack of, if you wish, professionalism or sufficient civilian control over the military, which I think allows for the military to use various problems as a pretext to actually seize power. So I think these are like the four kind of things which sets, if you wish, a condition for understanding what happened there and what has been going on.
What do you see as the responsibility of the commitment of the international community, and how might the conflict spread or affect other countries in the region?
Well, I think it's bad. One can imagine a lot of possible scenarios. Ones that will be very catastrophic, ones that will be almost benign, and things in between. I think at the most basic level, the expectation that has actually emerged over the past 20 years or so is that wherever civilians are actually being victimized by a force, either be their government or a military force that their government cannot, is incapable of if the government is in either victimizing civilians or incapable of protecting civilians, then the international community has a moral obligation to protect those people. So in that sense, one can say that right now, the people of northern Mali, the civilians there, do need to be protected, and since the government of Mali is not able to do so, then it is incumbent upon the wider international community to protect them. This is actually what the United Nations have claimed to be the right to its right to protect, and as in a way to what they call the responsibility to protect. So I think in that sense there's that moral obligation there. Beyond that, I think, again, I don't know how far, this radical Islamism that is actually growing in the north, I'm not too sure to what extent it will, directly impact other countries beyond the region. A worst-case scenario, one can see that it becomes a haven for, a safe haven for, terrorists, to, Al-Qaeda and other people to come. Like Afghanistan or Somalia. But I think that would be a worst-case scenario. What I think is more likely is if those groups actually grow in those areas, is that they will carve out territories wherein, they will impose their own interpretation of Islam and enforce rules which many people in the world will find to be, if you wish, unacceptable. And I think, again, that will maybe not so much of the security issue, but somehow it will raise the question as to whether we have a right to, the world has an obligation to, to help some of those people, or to prevent what some may perceive to be as cruel and treatment of people.
And that's our show for today. Don't forget to check us out on blogs.shu.edu/globalcurrent, and like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. For Laura Toledo, I'm Zach Kotz. Thank you for joining us.